Sâu lắm. Cẩn thận.
Ôi sâu thế nhở?
Đừng ra, đừng đây.
Thế là máy ngâm hết xuống nước rồi à anh?
Ừ.
Welcome to Flame and Frame. Today, I begin a very special rescue.
Có chuyện gì thế hả? Cô ơi! Đây, chị cho em một tí.
A man asked me to recover his after floodwaters swept it off the road and into the river.
Hộ anh đi. Anh có sao thế hả?
Thế anh trôi đây, xuống đây hộ anh cái.
Đây, anh để em xuống.
Sâu lắm. Cẩn thận.
Ôi sâu thế nhở?
Đừng ra, đừng đây.
Sao lại chạy tầm xuống thế này vậy anh?
The road to the scene was still covered in mud, showing just how powerful the flood had been.
Này, phải giúp em với.
Người sao anh ơi? Không sao đâu.
The car was almost completely submerged in murky water. I had no idea how badly the inside had been damaged. I entered the water to check the wheel positions, the depth, and the riverbed before attempting to pull. The mud held the car in place like an anchor. Pulling from the wrong angle could damage the chassis further. The winch was unloaded from the truck. It would be the most important tool in this rescue. I chose a strong tree as the anchor point, then checked the ground to make sure the winch would not slip.
Thế là máy ngâm hết xuống nước rồi anh.
The recovery cable was attached to a strong mounting point. Every connection had to be locked securely.
Anh Giai trên kia ơi, tới giúp em với. Ồ nó ạ. Anh ơi, ném cho em cuộn dây lúc nãy với.
Before starting, I checked the full path of the cable. No one could stand where it might snap back. The winch began pulling slowly. At last, the BMW showed its first sign of movement. Each turn brought the body a little closer to shore, but the suction from the mud was stronger than expected. Water and mud crowded around the wheels, continuously increasing the load on the recovery cable. I slowed the winch, but the cable was already at its limit. Even a small mistake could become dangerous. Suddenly, the winch cable snapped. The car stopped near the bank and could not be pulled any farther.
Để qua cầu.
I immediately stopped the entire operation, collected the broken cable, and called a crane tow truck. While we waited for help, we kept the BMW stubbless so it would not slide back into the river. The original plan had failed, but giving up now would allow the car to sink even deeper. The crane hooks were attached to strong lifting points. This time, the car would be lifted instead of dragged. The BMW slowly rose from the ground. After hours underwater, it had finally been recovered. The body was secured firmly on the recovery bed. Mud was still draining from small openings underneath. I brought the car back to the workshop. The most difficult part of the job was only beginning. The cabin was filled with mud and flood debris. Water had reached almost every part of the interior. The seats, dashboard, and electrical connectors were soaked. I would not attempt to start the car in this condition. I washed the heavy mud from the wheels first, so I could inspect the brakes and undercarriage clearly. High-pressure water pushed dirt from the wheel wells. These areas usually hold mud longer than anywhere else. I continued cleaning the underbody and body seams for the trapped mud could dry inside the structure. Every door was open to improve airflow. Drying the car early would reduce odors and mold growth. The entire exterior was washed carefully from top to bottom. The original yellow paint began to appear beneath the mud. As the surface became cleaner, the scratches and dents left by the flood slowly came into view. I removed each seat from the cabin. Dirty water had soaked deep into the foam inside. Mud and standing water remained beneath the seats. Left untreated, the metal floor would quickly begin to rust. The center console was removed carefully to reach the wiring and the hidden areas of the floor. The soaked carpet and sound insulation were taken outside. They held far more water than the visible surfaces. I separated every layer for cleaning and drying. Nothing would be reinstalled while it was still damp. I inspected the wiring harness along the floor. Mud inside a connector could cause a short at any moment. With the interior removed, I prepared the cleaning solution. Each area would be treated according to its material. Cleaning foam covered the entire body, breaking down oil, mud, and residue left by the flood. I scrubbed the wheel wells and body creases carefully, places that ordinary rinsing could not clean completely. The foam carried away the last heavy layers of mud. Now the original paint could be properly evaluated. The car was rinsed again with clean water. This prepared it for mechanical and body repairs. Once the dirt was gone, I saw the damage was extensive. Fortunately, the main structure still appeared repairable. The seats were cleaned separately with a gentler solution to remove the mud without damaging their surfaces. I scrubbed every seam and narrow gap in the upholstery. Floodwater leaves dirt deep inside these hidden areas. The dirty foam was rinsed away again and again until the runoff finally became clear. The seats were placed in a ventilated area to dry naturally. Too much heat could shrink or deform the materials. I disconnected and removed the electronic control units. They were among the most vulnerable parts after submersion. Applying power while a circuit board is damp can destroy it. Every connector had to be cleaned first. Each plug was labeled to prevent incorrect reassembly. Accuracy here would save many hours later. Mud was washed from the outside of each module before the units were taken to the inspection bench. I opened the control units to examine the circuit boards. Even a small trace of water could begin corrosion. The components were cleaned and dried at a safe temperature. I still did not know whether they would work again. The car was raised to access the drivetrain. I checked every support point before working underneath. Pneumatic lifting bags raised the body evenly and steadily, but mechanical stands were still essential for safety. I placed additional stands beneath the frame. A vehicle should never rely on only one lifting device. The engine and transmission connections were removed slowly. Mud and water made many bolts harder to release. The powertrain was supported before the mounts came off. This kept its weight from damaging the remaining lines. The old oil and fluids were collected separately. Their color would reveal how much water had entered. Every hose, wire, and bracket was detached from the engine. No component was pulled free by force. The drivetrain was slowly lowered from the car. This was the heaviest stage of the entire disassembly. The engine and transmission were separated on the bench so I could inspect each system independently. I cleaned the mud from the outside of the engine first. No dirt could be allowed to fall inside. I organized the bolts by assembly and location. A complex engine leaves no room for confusion. The first inspection showed that water had reached deep inside. Cylinder rust and seized moving parts were serious risks. I turned the engine by hand instead of using the starter. This could reveal a seized point without causing more damage. The accessories were removed from the engine block, opening the way for a complete internal inspection. The pulleys and drive components were removed separately. Every bearing had to be checked for water and rust. The old belts could no longer be trusted after submersion, where items would be replaced during reassembly. I began opening the main section of the engine. This was where the true extent of the damage would appear. The cylinder head was lifted even light to avoid scratching the sealing surfaces between the sections. Watermarks surrounded the combustion chambers. Fortunately, no major component appeared visibly broken. I continued removing parts in the correct order so every component could return to its original position. A drain pin was placed beneath the engine before releasing the oil. The fluid's appearance would provide an important answer. Black oil mixed with water poured from the engine. It proved the flood had reached the lubrication system. Oil loses its protective ability when mixed with water. If the engine had run, internal surfaces could be worn. I inspected the cylinder walls and piston surfaces closely. Light rust could still be repaired with careful treatment. Residue was removed with tools that would not scratch metal. The goal was to preserve each part's exact dimensions. Every small oil passage was cleaned individually. One blocked passage could destroy the engine after startup. The cylinder head and combustion chambers were inspected. I searched for cracks, warping, and water corrosion. The sealing surfaces were measured and leveled if required. Their flatness would determine compression after assembly. I separated the parts that were still safe to reuse from those that were not worth the risk. Small components were soaked in cleaning solution to soften old oil and mud before scrubbing. Pulleys, connecting rods, and other moving components were washed separately to prevent damage from contact. After cleaning, compressed air removed moisture from small holes. No water could remain hidden inside the oil passages. The valve mechanism was checked for play and proper sealing. These components control how the engine breathes. All parts were organized into separate groups. A clean workbench reduces mistakes during reassembly. After many hours, the parts were clean enough to assess. Fortunately, most of them could still be restored. I did not rush to rebuild the engine. Every surface needed one final check after fully drying. The bearing journals were cleaned and lightly polished to remove oxidation without changing their dimensions. The crankshaft was checked for straightness and wear. It must remain stable while rotating at very high speed. The rotating parts were returned in the correct direction and tightened in the required sequence and torque. The old seals and gaskets were discarded. After submersion, they could no longer seal reliably. I moved on to inspect the transmission, where water could enter through the breather openings. The shaft seals were removed and replaced. Even a small leak could drain the oil during operation. The transmission was cleaned, lubricated, and rebuilt carefully. Every shaft had to turn smoothly before sealing the case. I returned to the cylinder head for the final details. No mud or moisture remained inside the passages. The cylinder head was ready to be installed again. A clean and perfectly flat surface was essential. Reassembly began in the reverse order of disassembly. Every component was lubricated before the first startup. A new gasket was positioned in the correct direction. A small error could block an oil or coolant passage. The timing system was aligned to its reference marks. Incorrect timing could make the valve strike the pistons. The accessories returned to the engine one by one. The power unit slowly regained its original form. I rotated the crankshaft by hand through several cycles. Smooth movement showed that the parts were installed correctly. The lubrication system was primed and Advanceso oil would reach every surface from the first second. The engine assembly was returned to the engine bay. The mounts were aligned before being tightened. Fuel, coolant, and vacuum lines were reconnected. I checked every clamp to prevent leaks. The ignition system and sensors were connected. Every plug had to be dry, clean, and securely locked. The starter motor was installed again. It would be the first component to test a rebuilt engine. I inspected the entire wiring harness once more, especially the sections that had been deeply submerged. The clean control units returned to their original positions. At last, every part of the project began coming together. Fresh oil and coolant were filled to the correct levels. I still was not ready to turn the key. The battery was connected after the final inspection. No one knew how the engine would respond. After several turns, the engine came back to life. That sound was the reward for all the work behind us. I let it idle while monitoring temperature and pressure, along with every unusual sound from the engine bay. A running engine did not mean the work was finished. The headliner and interior still carried signs of the flood. The old headliner was removed to inspect the roof frame. Hidden moisture there could create odors and corrosion. The cabin was cleaned again and left to dry. I wanted no moisture trapped beneath the interior panels. With the engine stable, I turned to the bodywork. The flood had left several dents in the roof and doors. Each dent was marked and inspected from both sides. Metal repair begins at the deepest point of deformation. A pulling tab was temporarily welded to the damaged metal. It created a grip point to restore the original shape. I used several short pulls instead of one powerful pull. This reduced the risk of stretching or tearing the metal. After every pull, I checked the panel with a straight edge. Patience mattered more than speed at this stage. The roof was the hardest area because it was wide and thin. Even a small high spot would be obvious after painting. I worked from both inside and outside the roof until its original curve slowly returned. The dents in the doors and side panels were pulled similarly. Each area required a different direction of force. The temporary weld points were ground smooth afterward. The metal had to be cleaned before receiving protection. I removed the old paint around each repaired section to make sure no hidden rust remained underneath. Body filler was mixed with hardener at the correct ratio. A mixture that cures too fast or slow is difficult to shape. applied several thin coats instead of one thick layer. Thin layers bond better and are less likely to crack. The roof was filled along its original curve. The goal was a smooth surface without unnecessary weight. I waited until the material had fully hardened before sanding. Sanding too early would pull and distort the surface. Sandpaper on a flat block preserved the correct body lines. High and low spots appeared with each sanding pass. I check the surface by hand under different lighting angles. Sometimes fingertips detect flaws better than eyes. The repaired side panels were shaped in the same way. Reflections had to flow continuously across each panel. Some areas required filling and sanding several times. There is no shortcut to a truly flat surface. I checked the door gaps and body panel lines. They had to be even before the painting stage. Every repaired area received one final fine sanding. Even the smallest dust mark can show beneath gloss paint. The surface was blown clean and wiped with a special solution. From this point, I avoided touching the bare metal. The surrounding areas were masked carefully, leaving only the repair zones exposed for blending. A thin coat of primer covered the repaired areas, protecting against rust and revealing any remaining flaws. After drying, the primer was lightly wet-sanded. It had to be smooth without cutting through to bare metal. The paint was mixed to match the aged original color. Every older car develops its own unique degree of fading. I sprayed several thin coats with steady gun movement. Each coat added color gradually and prevented runs. The new paint was blended outward into the original finish. This made the repair boundary much harder to see. A clear coat added gloss and protected the color below. The surface now needed time to stabilize before polishing. I allowed the paint to cure for the proper amount of time instead of rushing assembly and leaving marks behind. Once hardened, small dust particles were removed and polished. The reflection across the body began to return. The dents left by the flood had nearly disappeared. The BMW once again looked straight and complete. I returned the clean headliner to the cabin. Every edge had to be stretched evenly without wrinkles. The roof lights and electrical connectors were reattached. Each function was tested before closing the trim panels. The interior panels were installed in their original order. Water-damaged clips were replaced with new ones. The cabin was now dry, clean, and free of muddy odors. I could begin finishing the flooring and seats. The floor lining and interior pieces were returned. The wiring still had to remain accessible for inspection. Before closing the interior, I cleaned the floor once more. Not a single grain of sand should remain trapped below. The sound insulation and carpet were fitted to the body. They made the cabin quieter and more complete. The center console and gear shift trim returned to place. These small details made the cabin feel like a car again. The rear seats and final trim panels were reinstalled. The space once filled with mud was now clean and dry. I checked the lights, brakes, steering, and instruments. The BMW would leave only when every safety system worked. The headlights came on and the engine held a steady idle. This was the moment I knew the BMW was ready. The car drove out of the workshop under its own power. Only hours earlier, that outcome had still been uncertain. I took it onto the road before returning it to the owner. Every sound and movement was monitored carefully. From a car submerged beneath the floodwater, it had returned to a road it seemed destined never to see again. Thank you for joining me on Flame and Frame. See you again on the next restoration journey.